molto. Chuck si gira. Signore e signori, autorità, gentile pubblico, ho il vivo piacere di porgere un cordiale saluto e benvenuto a nome del Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno. Il centro, per quelli che non lo sapessero, è una istituzione della comunità nazionale italiana che da più di 50 anni opera nel campo della ricerca storica e delle ricerche sociali. Sono stati 5 decenni e più di vita, di impegno civile e culturale e di produzione storiografica editoriale, sempre mossi dal fine del recupero del nostro passato e della memoria collettiva. Per questo motivo il Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno è particolarmente onorato di ospitare questo seminario internazionale dedicato al fenomeno dell'esodo della popolazione italiana, un fenomeno che ha segnato profondamente la storia di queste terre. È particolarmente anche onorato appunto di ospitare questo seminario organizzato in collaborazione con il Museo Etnografico dell'Istria e quindi un sentito ringraziamento va al Museo Etnografico e alle loro organizzatrici per aver scelto il Centro di Ricerche Storiche quale partner del progetto Identity on the Line e quale sede per lo svolgimento di questo importante seminario. Un grazie a voi tutti per la cortese attenzione e l'augurio di buon lavoro. Dame i gospodo, predstavnici vlasti, cijenjena publiko, veliko mi je zadovoljstvo uputiti srdečnu dobrodošlicu svim prisutnima u ime Centra za povijesna istraživanja Rovinj. Centar je jedna od institucija Talijanske nacionalne zajednice koja više od 50 godina djeluje na području povijesnih i društvenih istraživanja. 5 desetljeća života, građanskog i kulturnog opredjeljenja, historiografske i izdavačke produkcije, vođeni svrhom oporavka naše prošlosti i buđenja kolektivnog sjećanja. Iz toga razloga Centru je iznimna čast biti domaćin ovog međunarodnog seminara, organiziranog u suradnji sa Etnografskim muzejom Istre, posvećenog fenomenu egzodusa talijanskog stanovništva Istre, fenomenu koji je duboko obilježio povijest ovih krajeva. Od srca zahvaljujemo Etnografskom muzeju Istre što je odabrao Centar za povijesna istraživanja za partnera projekta Identity on the Line i mjesto održavanja ovog seminara. Hvala svima na sudjelovanju i najbolje želje za seminara. Još na engleskom. Ladies and gentlemen, authority, dear audience, I have the keen pleasure to extend a cordial welcome to all present on behalf of the Rovinj Historical Research Center. The center is one of the institutions of the Italian national community that has been operating in the field of historical research and social research for more than 50 years. 5 decades of life, of civil and cultural commitment, of historiographical and editorial production, driven by the purpose of recovering out past and awakening of collective memory. For this reason, the Center is particularly honored to host this international seminar, organized in collaboration with the Ethnographic Museum of Istria, dedicated to the phenomenon of the exodus of the Italian population from Istria, a phenomenon that has profoundly marked the history of these lands. A heartfelt thanks goes to the Ethnographic Museum of Istria for choosing Rovinj Historical Center as a partner of the Identity on the Line project and the location of this seminar. Thank you for your participation and best wishes for a good job. Grazie.
Dobro jutro svima. Buongiorno a tutti. Good morning to dear colleagues collaborators, friends, guests. And I really have to thank to the Center of Historical Research in the Ravine for hosting this meeting, the meeting that enables us to communicate the basic ideas about our project, which I and many of us find so very valuable. It enabled us also to collaborate with institutions such as this fantastic center that keeps so many records, fantastic documentation, and library that also helped us in our research. So thank you very much for that. I'm very sorry that your director is not with us, but thanks to Orietta, we are well hosted, and I wish you a very fruitful and a pleasant day today. Thank you.
I speak in two of official language of the Eastern region, Croatian and Italian, and this is the symbol of our history, our past. Pro primo vorrei salutare in nome del Presidente della Regione Istriana, il signor Boris Miletic, e vorrei ringraziare il Centro delle Ricerche Storiche e il Museo Etnografico per questa bellissima opportunità. È un tema che a noi nella Regione Istriana sta molto a cuore. Istarska županija nastoji sačuvati multikulturalnost, nastoji sačuvati višejezičnost, ali je vrlo svjesna da smo svi mi djeca granice, a kao što znate na granici postoje likvidna društva, tekuća društva koje se stalno mijenjaju. Nažalost u Istri se društvo mijenja prečesto, vrlo često i na jedan grub i loš način i to je ono što se događa kroz čitavu našu povijest. Neki su dolazili, neki su odlazili, a mi koji smo ostajali nosili smo se sa posljedicama svega toga. U toj želji da sačuvamo ono što je dobro i da ukažemo na ono što je bilo loše kako nam se ne bi dogodilo, ja svima želim uspješan rad i još jednom zahvaljujem i Etnografskom muzeju Istre i Centru di ricerche storiche na gostoprimstvu i organizaciji. Hvala vam, grazie, thank you.
Thank you very much. I am very sorry I have to speak in English. My name is Katrin Paps. I'm the project leader of Identity on the Line, and I'm not allowed to talk without this microphone.
Is it okay like that? It's better? Thank you very much for having us here. It's a very honor to be at your place in this beautiful city. And as we have heard from our colleagues, it's a very important center for the research conducted by our Croatian partners. So thank you very much. And thank you for taking the time being with us. I am excusing my language. I can only speak English and some other languages which are not Croatian and Italian. So please excuse that. And I would like to use 20 minutes now to present for you the Identity on the Line project which all partners, 7 European countries, are conducting right now. So, Identity on the Line is a large-scale cooperation project, and we want to look at the long-term consequences of migration processes in 7 European countries. Croatia is one of these 7 countries. And as you all know, there are migrant crises everywhere in Europe. There have been crises, there are crises, and we hope that the results of this project might also be useful for today's crises. I will come back to what is special with this project. Just some short information. It's a 4-year project, one of the international large-scale cooperation projects from Creative Europe, and we are co-funded with 1.28 million euro in total for all 7 countries. 4-year period, 2 years are over. So, who are we? We are 7 countries and 7 totally different migration processes. I would like to start. Am I allowed to move a little bit? So thank you very much. So I can go a little bit to the side here. Norway is one of the countries involved, and we are looking at a short migration period. The German soldiers come to Norway during the Second World War, producing quite some love stories, brutal history in the country, kids, and Norway is not finished with the consequences of this process. In Denmark, we are looking at the long-term consequences of the migration from Greenland to Denmark after 1945, and we can say now already that there still is a lot of racism in Denmark today regarding the people and their descendants coming from Greenland. In Sweden, we are working with a minority called the Sami minority and a forced migration from the north to the south 100 years ago. And still, 100 years later, we can see direct misunderstandings between the groups who came and the group who've been there before. In Poland, we are looking at the population exchange in former German Pomerania after the war, exemplified by a town called Ślubsk. In Lithuania, we're working with the Holocaust and the long-term consequences of women who have survived the Holocaust and what it meant for their descendants. In Slovenia, the migration from the former Yugoslav republics to Slovenia after the Second World War. And finally, in Croatia, which is, of course, the main topic while we are here in this country, the complex political history of the Istrian Peninsula and its multi-ethnic population, related to approximately 200,000 immigrants after the World War II. This is quite big numbers which we have looked at, and I just want to give you a short overview of the whole project, what we are doing. The partner said we want to cooperate with new audiences, meaning that these people haven't been heard before. We are working with people who have not had a voice before we interviewed them and asked them to cooperate with us. We are interviewing 3 generations of people because we want to see at the long-term consequences. So we are talking to the time witnesses, the people who had left or came back, and we are talking to their kids and grandchildren. We are producing 8 exhibitions, 1 in each country, and in addition, a traveling joint exhibition, which will travel through approximately 12 countries. We are producing a 44-minute-long movie summing up all our findings, and we have in addition 7 5-minute-long movies for each of the countries, and all our results will be publicly available to download for everyone who wants it in whole Europe. Online publication, 4 till 6 scientific articles, training and education for professionals, workshops, we have had 8 already. I'm looking very much forward to the next days. And we had also lectures by European professionals contributing to this issue. Guided visits to places of remembrance. I'm looking forward to the places we are going to see the next 2 days here in the country. And we will, because school kids are one of our main priority, prepare everything we have found out for school kids in different ages. It's quite a lot. I just want to give, I have only 20 minutes and it's only 10 minutes left, I guess. I just want to give you some examples of what we found so far, that you know what we are talking about. Before I do so, please have in mind that what is special in this project is that we want to see what happens to the kids and grandchildren. There was not much focus on this in the museums. Not only are we talking to people who have not a voice before, but it always does something to the kids and grandkids if you don't know what has happened to your parents or grandparents who may not be able to talk because it was too tough, or they don't want to talk because they want to spare you for the pain they have experienced. But it does something with the relations, and we are also interested in that. In sum, all partners have conducted 178 interviews, and it's not an interview taking 1 hour per person. Some of our partners, we are talking about 12 to 15 hours per person, per interview. In other countries, it's maybe only 3 hours. What was special with this project is that all 7 countries have used the same interview guide, meaning that we have a possibility to compare the material collected. So even if we have somehow different approaches to the interview length and how we stored it, how we use it, we have all agreed on a common interview guide and have asked the same questions in all countries. 62 quotes of the 178 interviews are presented in our joint exhibition which will travel through Europe. I just want to give you a short overview of our findings. comparing all material, all 170 interviews, we saw that there are ongoing attempts in all three generations, not only the migrants themselves, but also the ones to come, to find somewhere their place between those poles. Home and away, belonging and alienation, silence and openness, resilience and vulnerability, injustice and reconciliation. It sounds very technical, it is not. And I just want to give you some examples. I will be a little bit quiet to leave it to you to read it. You just get a short impression about what we are talking about. And don't give you too much time, so you just have to read quickly, and then you have to watch. You have to come and watch our movie and see the exhibition. Okay, I'm sorry I have to stop this here. I hope you get a kind of understanding that I hope you see what we are seeing, that in the end it doesn't matter if we are talking about Sweden, if we are talking about Croatia, if we are talking about Denmark, Norway, which country it is. The people we have talked to, they have shared experiences with us which were very, very difficult to talk about. For all of us who have conducted these interviews, it was very difficult to hear these stories because we could feel that the person telling it was so important for them, such a big part of their personality and who they were, that it was really difficult to talk to us. And many wanted to be anonymous, not here, but in other countries as well. And they were still shaken when they thought back in time what has happened to them then. I'm sorry I can't talk long about that, so I just want to round off with giving you some idea what we will do with this material now. Because we want to analyze this to come to new conclusions. We want to have some answers for the questions, what can museums do and should do when they are experiences or suddenly see that some stories in one's country's history have not been told before. The little red prick which you see is one personal narrative. You know, all museums work with personal narratives. You have a lot of Italian stories here. So this is one story. And all these stories we know from before, they are somehow in a historical frame. This historical frame might relate to knowledge we have. It might also be formed by politicians who want us to not operate outside of this frame. And inside this frame, we have many different stories which somehow fit in. Many people told something which we know, which is okay. We have a main part, a mainstream story here. And then there is an issue with some stories which have not been heard before, not been shared before, maybe because one was afraid to tell a story because you didn't know the reactions of the country or the people you are telling it to. So, what does it mean for these people? What does it mean for these people that their stories are at no museum, no historical place, no cultural institution? Who is taking care of their story? Who are they? What does it mean that they shouldn't be heard? Nobody wants to hear them. So we believe, the Partners in Identity on the line believe that if we give space and place to those stories who haven't been heard before, if we have a historical frame revised, then maybe those people who haven't had the place to tell their story before will start doing so. And why is this important? It is important at four different levels. It's important for the individuals themselves and their families, and that is at least our experiences from the 170 interviews, that if you are not heard, if nobody wants to hear your story because you don't fit in the mainstream story, you really feel alone, and it does something to you. It does something to your feeling of who you are. Do you belong to a community? Do you belong to a city? Do you belong to a country? So being heard and included is really important, and there is, of course, a lot of theory supporting this statement. And it is also important for the relations between the generations. And I would almost like to challenge all of you to think back to your own family history. Is there anything your parents or grandparents have experienced but never talked about? And what does it mean for you if you suddenly find out? What does it mean to you that you didn't know it? Maybe they wanted to spare you. They didn't want you to feel pain. Maybe they felt ashamed of something they did. But we have experienced, and we have worked, among others, with psychologists, that secrets are always more dangerous than stories. So if museums work in the way we do, in the way you do, it is always beneficial. Of course, there are many ethical considerations to take, but it is always beneficial. It is important for the visitors. It's important for the people who are listening to our stories, who are visiting our exhibitions in all countries, because you feel less alone if you suddenly realize that there are other people out there having the same experiences. And if no one talks about it, everyone feels alone, of course. I make it very easy. I could talk 2 hours about each of these points. I won't, of course, do it now. For the society as such, it's very important because all individuals in a country should get their place and be heard. So it's a positive. We think it will help. It will help a positive development of society if more and more people are heard. And of course, museums have the responsibility to present it as true image as possible. You can hear that I'm quite idealistic talking. I'm coming from Norway. We can say whatever we want. And I'm very much aware of it, that in the Balkan, some countries, and also in East Europe, there is no possibility to tell all stories, even not for museums, because the political pressure is getting higher and higher. So that is a real danger which we are following closely. So I am talking, I am referring to an ideal world, and there are many circumstances to take into consideration. For the people involved, it's the same feeling of loneliness. So museums, if possible, have to stand up for them. So the most important prerequisites: respect for the people you talk to, earned trust, knowledge, and ethical considerations. Thank you very much.
dietro, facciamo un po' break.
Ah, ok. Non c'è. Bene, il mio intervento sarà in lingua italiana questa volta, ma è stata distribuita anche la traduzione in lingua inglese e io mi soffermerò a parlare in generale, ovviamente, perché in 20 minuti è impossibile, sugli studi e ricerche fatte dal Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno e dedicate appunto all'esodo dell'Istria nel secondo dopoguerra, sulla grande tematica dell'esodo, perché è diciamo così, è un vaso di Pandora l'esodo dell'Istria. Iniziamo dicendo che appunto nei suoi 5 decenni e passa di vita l'attività del Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno, come ho già detto negli indirizzi di saluto, è stata indirizzata allo studio della storia, delle tradizioni civili, culturali e sociali degli italiani dell'Istria, di Fiume e della Dalmazia. Le sue pubblicazioni in generale sono state rivolte al recupero di una storia e di una tradizione, soprattutto di storia politica e nazionale, intesa come parte integrante della storia istriana e della storia anche della comunità nazionale italiana, che è divenuta poi minoranza con il passaggio dell'Istria alla Jugoslavia dopo la fine del secondo conflitto mondiale. L'esodo della popolazione italiana dall'Istria e da Fiume, con punte anche molto marcate di popolazione croata e slovena, è stato un processo molto complesso e articolato che si è manifestato con l'abbandono appunto della terra di origine, passata sotto sovranità jugoslava da parte di quasi un'intera comunità nazionale. Quella italiana nell'arco di tempo che va dal 1945 al 1956, quindi tutto un decennio, e che ha portato appunto alla nascita di quella che poi nello Stato jugoslavo è stata definita minoranza nazionale italiana in Jugoslavia. Il fenomeno dell'esodo dall'Istria è un fenomeno ben noto agli storici, sono state pubblicate tantissimi studi, soprattutto da parte della storiografia italiana, come ricorderò. È un fenomeno quindi ben noto agli storici, ma è anche, possiamo dire che è stato ormai dato per acquisito il suo inserimento sia nell'ambito delle dinamiche migratorie dell'area nord adriatica nel corso del Novecento che nel contesto degli spostamenti forzati di popolazione che hanno segnato il secolo scorso nell'Europa centro-orientale. Ecco, questo è un versante degli studi che si è sviluppato soprattutto negli ultimi 2 decenni, diciamo così. Il termine esodo è stato sinteticamente usato dalla storiografia italiana soprattutto per definire una serie di esodi. Non si è trattato di un grande esodo, cioè tutta la popolazione, 200-250 mila e più persone se ne sono andate in un momento, ma è stato definito per definire una serie di piccoli e grandi esodi che presentano caratteristiche, motivazioni, ritmi e tempi propri, ma che nel loro insieme costituiscono comunque un fenomeno unitario, in quanto rappresentano la risposta, alla fin fine diciamo univoca, della popolazione italiana della regione al radicale cambiamento delle condizioni di esistenza portato dalla politica del nuovo regime comunista jugoslavo. Ecco, da un punto di vista storico, l'impatto dell'esodo sulla società istriana costituì un momento di svolta nella storia della regione, in quanto appunto circa metà della popolazione, quindi quasi un'intera componente nazionale, quella che aveva fino allora detenuto diciamo così, l'egemonia politica, economica e culturale, scomparve completamente quasi nel corso di un decennio, determinando poi uno squilibrio etnico che non si è mai più ricomposto. Ecco, all'interno della produzione storiografica italiana la problematica dell'esodo è stata a lungo monopolizzata dalle forze politiche di destra, quindi parlo della storiografia italiana appunto della Repubblica Italiana, Quindi la storiografia è stata a lungo monopolizzata dalle forze politiche di destra, oltre che a rimanere ovviamente molto viva nel circuito delle organizzazioni degli esuli e quindi all'interno delle associazioni degli esuli. È molto vasta la pubblicazione di memorie, soprattutto legate all'esodo, c'è un'immensità di pubblicazioni. Tuttavia questa produzione è risultata in ogni caso sempre molto ideologizzata. E soprattutto e soltanto dagli anni 90, appunto del secolo scorso in poi, la storiografia italiana ha prodotto importanti studi, e qui ricorderò gli studi soprattutto di Raul Pupo, ma anche della Cataruzza, di Spazzali ed altri studiosi, ed ha raggiunto un alto livello di elaborazione storiografica. Da parte Jugoslavia prima invece il tema è stato completamente ignorato, se non in chiave polemica, chiaramente polemica, mentre la storiografia invece croata vi ha dedicato una prudente attenzione, soprattutto negli ultimi 2 decenni. E sono state anche fatte una serie, diciamo così, di non pubblicazioni vere e proprie, ma comunque articoli dedicati al tema. La storiografia invece slovena ha dedicato un forte impegno raggiungendo un considerevole livello invece di elaborazione storiografica. Per quanto riguarda la ricerca storica, anche diciamo, il Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno si è inserito a partire dagli anni 90 del secolo scorso, soprattutto dopo la caduta del muro di Berlino e la dissoluzione della Jugoslavia. Anche il centro si è inserito nella ricerca riguardante le tematiche dell'esodo. Sono state avviate nuove riflessioni liberi dai condizionamenti di quella che era fino allora considerata la storiografia di Stato, quindi una storiografia molto ideologica, su tutte le vicende di quelle che riguardavano non solo sulle vicende dell'esodo, ma su tutte le vicende che hanno riguardato la Seconda Guerra Mondiale e il dopoguerra. E nella nuova stagione di ricerche appunto avviate sull'Istria nel dopoguerra e sull'esodo, il Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno ha partecipato contribuendo allo studio del grande tema della costruzione del cosiddetto potere popolare, quindi dell'instaurazione del nuovo regime politico jugoslavo sulle terre istriane. La costruzione del potere popolare jugoslavo, considerata sia all'interno appunto della complessa vicenda jugoslava, ma soprattutto calata nella realtà istriana. Le prime ricerche in questo campo sono state condotte in quel periodo dalla sottoscritta e da Roberto Spazzali, un ricercatore, uno storico italiano. E in quel periodo appunto le ricerche si erano soffermate sul tema dell'epurazione, un tema considerato molto importante in quanto uno strumento che ha reso possibile comprendere meglio sia la logica di instaurazione del regime comunista e l'organizzazione dello stesso, quindi del potere politico jugoslavo, e sia soprattutto la politica che quel regime seguì nei confronti della popolazione italiana. Inoltre in quel periodo altre ricerche, innescate sempre dagli impulsi partiti dal Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno, hanno esplorato alcuni nodi che fino a tempo prima erano considerati tabù, quali ad esempio le misure repressive attuate alla fine della Seconda Guerra Mondiale, e tra queste gli espropri, i lavori forzati, la collettivizzazione dell'agricoltura e le strutture del potere comunista, quali nella fattispecie i comitati popolari di liberazione. Ecco, in quel periodo sono state avviate anche una serie di ricerche d'archivio e raccolte di memorie e testimonianze relative proprio all'esodo della popolazione italiana dall'Istria e da Fiume e la questione delle opzioni per la cittadinanza italiana. I risultati poi di tali ricerche e tutte quelle tematiche che in quel periodo occuparono il dibattito culturale interno alla comunità italiana, ma anche la storiografia in generale, hanno trovato soprattutto nelle riviste quaderni monografie ed etnia del Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno sono delle riviste che vengono pubblicate, se non annualmente, i quaderni almeno annualmente, le monografie e l'etnia invece periodicamente. Ecco, in queste riviste sono state pubblicate soprattutto questo tipo di ricerche e quindi hanno trovato una sede autorevole per la pubblicazione, appunto, questi tipi di tematiche. Diversi sono stati gli apporti in quel periodo di Luciano Giuricin, ricercatore e fondatore del Centro di Ricerche Storiche di Rovigno, ma anche di Giacomo Scotti, che abbiamo pubblicato alcuni suoi articoli sulla rivista Quaderni del Centro, della sottoscritta, ma anche di altri autori italiani come Gloria Nemez, Paiano, che hanno pubblicato dei bellissimi libri sulla memoria soprattutto della popolazione italiana rimasta. Quindi importanti contributi hanno dato questi autori alla ricerca storica su queste tematiche. Sul piano degli studi in generale riguardo appunto la grande tematica dell'esodo, mentre le motivazioni soggettive dell'esodo, quindi le memorie e tutte queste cose sono state indagate tantissimo, e soprattutto anche la ricostruzione fattuale proprio dell'esodo sono delle tematiche che sono ormai di cui abbiamo ormai tantissime pubblicazioni, soprattutto da parte della storiografia italiana. Sono state esplorate sulla base di fonti orali e anche dalla documentazione di provenienza soprattutto italiana. Le ricerche invece più recenti, soprattutto da parte diciamo, del Centro di Ricerche Storiche, ma della sottoscritta, si sono invece concentrate sulle politiche jugoslave attuate nei confronti appunto degli italiani. Ecco, venendo qui alle mie ricerche, studi compiuti negli ultimi anni, il problema dell'esodo invece è stato affrontato con uno sguardo diverso dal passato. Grazie, e questo è stato reso possibile grazie alle nuove fonti accessibili presso gli archivi della Repubblica di Croazia, che hanno, soprattutto a Zagabria, ma anche a Pisino e a Fiume, che hanno consentito di porre come oggetto di studio gli organismi del potere civile e le strutture del Partito Comunista croato sul territorio istriano. Gli esiti di tale ricerche sono confluiti poi nel volume Il potere popolare in Istria, 1945-1953, un volume pubblicato dal Centro di Ricerche Storiche nel 2016, ed è un volume che ripercorre proprio le tappe di costruzione del potere popolare, di questo nuovo potere appunto civile e amministrativo da parte del nascente regime comunista jugoslavo nella complessa realtà istriana nel decennio appunto poc'anzi ricordato. E queste ricerche si sono soffermate soprattutto nel territorio di quella che oggi è considerata l'Istria appartenente alla Repubblica di Croazia, quindi però ad esclusione della zona di Buje e di Pola, in quanto questi territori hanno avuto un percorso storico diverso. Questo focus di indagine ha riguardato i territori istriani stabilmente occupati nella primavera del 1945 da parte appunto dei partigiani jugoslavi e annessi dopo il trattato di pace del 1947, e questo è il territorio, in quanto in questo territorio si è registrata una continuità del potere che ha reso così anche più facile poi l'indagine. In primo luogo, ricordo qualcosa appunto di che cosa si tratta questa ricerca. In primo luogo la ricerca ha rivolto l'attenzione al complesso dei cambiamenti politici, sociali ed economici che sono stati introdotti nell'area istriana con il passaggio all'amministrazione jugoslava. E poi si è offerto un quadro d'assieme circa la politica attuata nei confronti della popolazione istriana, sia quella italiana sia quella jugoslava, nel periodo compreso tra il 1945 e il 1953. Questo fenomeno, che è stato appunto più volte indagato, come ricordato, dalla storiografia italiana, ma molto meno appunto da quella croata, è stato qui in questa ricerca analizzato focalizzando l'attenzione su quelli che furono i principali agenti del cambiamento, cioè vale a dire i nuovi centri del potere creati dal regime jugoslavo, e vale a dire la polizia segreta, l'OSNA, l'esercito, la giustizia e i comitati popolari di liberazione, nonché il partito. Quindi l'attenzione è stata rivolta a questi centri del potere. E in questo modo si è potuto verificare come le politiche applicate su un territorio complesso e particolare, qual era quello istriano del dopoguerra, produssero violenze e privazione dei diritti a danno dell'intera popolazione, ma soprattutto generarono le spinte che nell'ambito poi di un processo rivoluzionario complessivo indussero all'emigrazione fuori dai confini politici un intero gruppo nazionale, quello italiano, appunto nel periodo dal 45 al 53 e quasi appunto nella sua totalità. Alcune tematiche sulle quali ho rivolto l'interesse di studio sono state le logiche, gli obiettivi e i metodi di governo jugoslavo, così come i risultati conseguiti poi dalle autorità jugoslave che dal maggio 1945 assunsero il controllo dell'Istria. In questo modo ho potuto constatare che l'esodo istriano è apparso una conseguenza diretta del processo di presa del potere, di costruzione e di consolidamento del nuovo Stato jugoslavo, e quindi l'abbandono pressoché totale degli italiani, della componente italiana appunto dall'Istria, si è confermato non essere stato appunto un obiettivo, almeno nella parte iniziale, diciamo così, del percorso appunto del regime comunista, non essere stato quindi un obiettivo del regime jugoslavo né da esso fu organizzato, però le condizioni create dall'esercizio del potere da parte delle autorità jugoslave portarono le comunità italiane alla scelta dell'esilio, che si consumò appunto nell'arco di un decennio, attraverso l'esercizio dell'opzione per la cittadinanza italiana oppure attraverso le fughe clandestine. Che le fughe clandestine è un altro tema molto, diciamo così, molto importante e molto complesso, in cui sono state iniziate tantissime anche serie di ricerche su queste tematiche. Vado quindi a concludere dicendo che la partenza quindi in massa degli italiani, accompagnata sempre, ricordo, anche da nuclei consistenti di popolazione croata e slovena, quindi la partenza italiani nel dopoguerra, rientra quindi nella categoria di esodi, intesa quale tipologia specifica all'interno dei grandi spostamenti forzati di popolazione che hanno interessato l'Europa centro-orientale tra l'Ottocento e il Novecento e che hanno condotto alla semplificazione di quei territori precedentemente bilingui e multinazionali. E qui mi soffermerei, se ho ancora tempo magari potrei ancora concludere, non lo so, riesco ancora? Ok, ecco, in questo modo l'azione svolta dalle strutture del regime comunista jugoslavo rappresentò di fatto, ma anche ai livelli invece interni molto più vicini, con una buona consapevolezza, rappresentò quindi lo strumento che permise la nazionalizzazione integrale di un'area multietnica, come era quella dell'area del nord Adriatico, a favore della componente slava. Tuttavia però qui è sempre da ricordare che la gestione dell'Istria plurietnica rientrò nel processo di ridefinizione nazionale che lo Stato jugoslavo aveva avviò alla fine della Seconda Guerra mondiale nei territori liberati dal suo esercito, e anche che la politica nazionale del regime, improntata sul modello sovietico, e questo è sempre da ricordare, prevedeva comunque l'uguaglianza tra i popoli fondatori del nuovo Stato e le altre nazionalità. E come in altri anche paesi dell'Europa centro-orientale, in questo processo rientrò il trattamento riservato quindi ai popoli occupanti, che però in Jugoslavia non fu uniforme. Se ad esempio 500.000 Volksdeutsch jugoslavi, quindi tedeschi jugoslavi che vivevano sul territorio jugoslavo, furono espulsi e le loro proprietà confiscate. Alla minoranza invece ungherese fu riservato un trattamento diverso, e anche alla minoranza italiana, quella che divenne minoranza italiana, fu riconosciuto appunto il ruolo di minoranze, un gioco di parole, e che comunque con alcune varianti furono entrambe, sia la minoranza ungherese che quella italiana, furono integrate nel nuovo Stato jugoslavo. In particolare per quanto riguarda, appunto, ricordo ancora soltanto questo, per quanto riguarda gli italiani delle terre del nord Adriatico, attraverso un processo che fu anche di integrazione ma anche di espulsione, fu riconosciuto il loro ruolo di minoranza, e nei loro confronti fu adottata la politica dell'unità e la fratellanza, che nella nuova variante diventò la fratellanza italo-slava. Si trattava però, ricordo, di una nazionalità che nelle mutate condizioni faceva riferimento a una madrepatria esterna, e quindi lo Stato italiano, e che durante la guerra aveva aggredito, smembrato e anche occupato lo Stato jugoslavo. Da parte del regime quindi si trattò in un certo senso di ripulire i confini dagli elementi inaffidabili, per mettere però i confini in sicurezza, e tutto ciò rivestì un ruolo importante appunto nel trattamento riservato appunto poi agli italiani e anche alla nazionalità ovvio ungherese. Da queste però pregiudiziali nascevano anche la diffidenza, la sfiducia e il sospetto che per lungo tempo il potere comunista manifestò nei confronti della minoranza italiana che visse in Jugoslavia. Ma tutto questo, appunto la storia degli italiani che rimasero a vivere in Jugoslavia e della nostra storia, è tutta un'altra storia che ci riserviamo di dedicare un altro seminario a queste tematiche. Grazie.
Thank you, Catherine. I would like to open the floor, maybe. Our colleagues had a translation of Orieta's presentation, so if there is any question maybe that you wish to or comment, or if se c'è qualche domanda a
sì.
Catherine, ecco, abbiamo una decina di minuti e poi dopo ecco, ci fermiamo per una pausa caffè e ricominciamo alle 11:30. So we will have a break and we will get back here for the workshop at 11:30. So yeah, any questions or comments? You're welcome.
Sono delle tematiche molto complesse, per cui magari per chi ne ha sentito parlare la prima volta di queste tematiche è un po' così, molto arduo. Sono 50 anni di dibattiti storici, che sia la storiografia italiana, croata, si contendono.
It's probably difficult for someone who just heard for it the time to articulate the question. So, thank you very much. I would like to invite you for a group photo in front of the building. And then, Lydia, it's fine that we go up. Yeah? And then we will have a coffee break just in front of the building. Thank you very much.
Grazie a voi.
floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me here to this very important meeting. I was baffled when hearing about the amount of interviews that you have been collecting during the years, the 2 years that you have been a part of the project, but also a part as persons due to the pandemics. I'm also honored by being here at the Historical Center. This is the first time I've been here, so it's particularly interesting for me. What I am going to talk about will be partisan monuments, primarily in Istria. But I will start at another end. But why I mention it at the beginning is because I heard in the taxi when traveling here that in Ravin there has been a suggestion that you should collect all the partisan monuments into some kind of a park and have stories told about what is behind these monuments. And I think that is a very creative way of dealing with the kind of monuments that are unprotected by law. They are so-called, today they would be called wild monuments because they are no longer representing the state that once was existing, the state of Yugoslavia. Before we were hearing about all these stories that have been collected, 178 different life stories that has been the goal of long interviews. I will start by talking about some of the bodily memories that cannot be narrated. And then we go on from there. My colleague and wife in a... I can mention first that the monuments in Yugoslavia has gained international attention. I have been participating in a book that is called Transforming Heritage in Former Yugoslavia, that is published by Palgrave this summer. I haven't been at home to see if it's in my mailbox, but this book is fascinating, I can tell you. And I've been doing something in Swedish also about memorials. The title of this book is Memorials, and it's from historians of idea, it is from ethnologists, it's from anthropologists, and it's from art historians. Those of you who can read Scandinavian languages are welcome to that. But what I am really going to talk about is this book, Sensitive Objects. That is published a couple of years ago, edited by Maja Povrosanovic-Frykman and myself, and it contains stories and essays done by social anthropologists, some of which are really very much famous within affect studies. And the object of the book is to look at the connection between affects and material culture. There is a preface that we are putting it into a frame, but I'm going to pick a couple of examples from that book to start with, so you can understand why I'm interested in the connection between affect and material culture. In her study of how it is to be living in Sarajevo during war, my wife Maja was having access to interviews done by people who were recipients of international help, who were living on the help, the everyday experiences of how it is to receive international humanitarian aid. There is so much written about Sarajevo, books about the fighting and where is the blame to be put and so on. but how does it feel to be the recipient of humanitarian aid? And 90% of the population that lived in Sarajevo were recipients of humanitarian aid. The humiliation of not being in a reciprocal situation is very severe. But it leaves also some bodily memories on you. And those bodily memories, I can say, were rather hard to talk about. How can you document something which is not being able to put into a narration? A narration has a beginning, it has an end, and it has a structure. So when a story is told a couple of times, then it is no longer effective. It is something which you have got a handle on. Affects is something that is so extremely strong, and it's mixed feelings, and you don't really know what you're exposed to. I will read a quote from it. It's a woman who was remembering to be freezing in 1992 because the winter came with a terrible cold. I can tell you, the windows, they don't exist. They were all broken by the shells. Terribly, terribly cold. I mean, since then, I have not been able to stand two things. I cannot stand the cold. Not even today, not for a second. And the other thing is that I can't stand dim lights. There can be a romantic light in the house, but I can't stand it. I must have 100 watt. All the time I must have light in the house. Even today, it might be strange to say, but if the radiators stop functioning, something happens. Something needs immediate repairing. And the temperature, if I notice that it's falling, I freeze the very same moment, even if the radiators are still warm. It's the same with water. If there is no water, you freak out. You run to the shop, you buy water, even distillated water, so you have access to the water. I think I have some kind of reflex fear, a trauma that in a way triggers it. And she says that she is freaking out at the lack of running water. She can't stand when there is cold, when she's exposed to cold. So what is happening here is that the feeling she is getting is, or the experience, the bodily experience is creating an intensity. Affect is intensity. It makes meaning to her that she can't understand herself, perhaps. And Maya is quoting an anthropologist by the name of Michael Jackson. He doesn't sing and he doesn't dance, but he's a very good scholar. A woman who survived Ravensbrück. And she says, the presence of bread today never erases the memory of the absence of bread in the past. Every time she is exposed to eating bread, something is happening in her body which she cannot get rid of. And what we are exposed to in this case is a synesthetic experience. It's the taste that produces this, it's the presence of bread. She can hear what she heard in Ravensbrück. She can smell it with all her senses. She is back into the camp. And that is very hard to tell about, to make a narration out of this. You can hint at it and try to make a story, but you almost have to be there and see what it is. You have done the interviews, you're familiar with the expression on the face, the shuddering of the body. And that's why I was asking before, do you record the interviews? What happens at such moment is that the affects that you are having is closing the distance between then and now. This closing of distance between then and now. Also very hard to formulate in words, in a narration. Yeah. So much about this with corporal memories. But there is something else that I wanted to demonstrate to you. And that is, when you see a monument, it's always mostly on a horse, sitting on a horse, or someone in a heroic position. This is the monument to international community from the grateful citizens of Sarajevo. Do you know what it is? It's canned meat, some kind of canned beef. That was so horrible that not even the cat was eating it. And adding injury to the humiliation that they were thought of as being able to consume this kind of food. So the reason for them to put up this spomenik was to thank the international community for being so ready to help them. This was at the same time as the international community was bombing the war in the Gulf and using billions and billions of dollars in order to save the oil fields. And the Sarajevan people thought that perhaps they could save the lives of some Bosnian guys also. But what is theoretically important with this is that it's the connection between the object and the memory. There is a kind of affective continuity that is produced in relation to this object. It could be some clothes from the past. I can make a quick dash through the pictures because I have something with the Sami people that are yeah. Two anthropologists, Britt Krambig and Ann-Britt Flemmen, in Sensitive Objects, were writing about the humiliation being created by someone dressing up in a mock gakti. And there is a firm in Norway called Kiwi. I think Norwegians are familiar with it, and they should have some kind of promotion activity up in Tromsø. And then they had these dresses, the typical Sami dresses, sewn up in China and painted green. You know that the Gatki are an identity symbol of extreme importance for this. So again, talking about the reaction among the Sami population, you will know very much about this, Elena, and it felt as if they, as it said in one of the statements from this occasion, as if they were pissing on our identity, because there was something in the background of long time colonization of the Sami and long time oppression of the Sami also. But by doing this in this situation, something was just exploding within the Sami community. And it's very easy to understand if you're in such a situation. Again, it was closing the gap between then and now.
Yeah.
This precisely.
Actually, now, last year, Finland made ethical guidelines for tourist companies because they often also use Gakti even if they are not Sami themselves. So it's good, something is happening.
Yeah.
So the Finlandic ethical guidelines for tourists, they are good.
And this is, it's so multi-layered, this experience, so it's hard to tell a story about it. But again, this is illustrating something which I think is important in almost all affect studies, namely, try to go to the situation. Try to discover what's happening in the situation. Ask the informant to talk about the situation. A life story, it must, through its structure, be a narration. That is most wonderful. It's so great. But also try to go to a situation where material culture is involved, because objects are carriers of multi-layered information and affects, and that is reachable. I mean, for you as museum people to have the context around an object, starting from an object and trying to discover the many different situations and contexts that it has been involved in, is something that can open up for effective identification by the viewer or the visitor also. So much about the object and the material, how material culture can be carriers. I will come back to yeah?
Yeah.
Oh yes, sorry. I have multitasking here, and I'm now going to come back to Istria. And you will visit this place in the afternoon or in the evening. And I haven't been there for 15 odd years, so it might be looking totally different today. I don't know. The information I'm collecting is produced by Lydia Nikocevic, doing interviews, and also two journalists in Partisan, Davor Šišović and Radenko Slokovic. And it's also investigated on my behalf by Kristina Uselac, a sociologist from Zagreb. Let us see if I can point out you. I thought I could point with the mouse, but I can't. Can you identify the road from Partisan to Motovon? There somewhere is Čiče. Čiče, sorry.
Approximately here.
Yes. In the year of 2000, they were going to build, the local administration was going to build a road, or to widen a road between Partisan and Motovon. Two wonderful places to visit, both of them. And then they found some irregularities at the side of the road. Someone had been putting up a fence, and there it said that it was a private property. And the whole plot was around half of a football field, and on that field. Now, I must mention, the importance of any monument is decided upon where it is located, of course. And this was located in the wrong place, not only because it was beside the road, but there are no such monuments allowed. It was a gravesite. And it was put up to commemorate some killing of 20 Italian, supposedly fascists. That was the local story. And put in a hole there, and then it was supposed to be forgotten. This was then, when I was doing the study, the first commemoration of the former enemy in Istria. Is that right, Lydia?
Excuse me?
The first commemoration of the so-called enemy in in Istria. Was there any commemoration of Italian fascists before?
Yes, actually, but not in this very way. So that was a very specific way to buy a property and to go with private property and then commemorate it in this way.
Yes. And you can see on the picture that it's a gravesite. And sorry. No. Oh, buggers. Yeah, I can talk about it anyway. The story goes that 20 people were supposed to be taken there, and on a lorry driven from Partisan to this God-forgotten place on May 10th, one day after the peace was signed. And they had been trying to escape to Trieste, but was arrested by the partisans. When they were arrested, they told some townsfolk that were coming from Motovun that we will be home before dinner. But then what happened was that they stopped at this Foibe, as it's called. I'm not going to dig further into the Foibe history, but that is a long and complicated story. And they were killed and thrown into the pit. And I quote from the interview by Lydia Nikocevic: "Not all died at once," said two women that were interviewed. "Not all died at once. Some of them were dying for a day or more. The people that passed by heard some roars, especially between 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock in the night, but they thought these were animals. Some of them even cried, 'Mama, mama.' One person that was passing by was the mother of a boy that was in the hole. She was passing by with two women and she heard these shouts, thinking it came from animals. Later on, she found out that it wasn't animals, and she got insane and never recovered." Now, these horrifying details were never released until these interviews was done by you. They knew that there had been a ceremony at the place when this altar was being put up, but it was not given publicity. A priest had been coming from Italy, one from Motovun, and there had been a family that was coming from Motovun that were taking part in this ceremony and erecting the memorial. But the women who had been witnessing the event were told, "If you mention one word, you will have the same fate as we have given to these people." But when this, so I mean, they could not tell anyone in the village. And the interesting thing with this is that it's not part of a collective memory. It was not made into a narration. It didn't have the structure of a narration. It was something that was hindering them in their everyday life to be communicating with other people. I mean, I think I must find my favorite quote on, or oh, it disappeared, strangely enough. Yeah, here, sorry. So it was not narrated. What I'm trying to say here is that corporal memories is not something that we only have but that we also are. It is part of our identity. It is a way we are existing in the world. It is, as if you can think, Pierre Bourdieu's idea about habitus. It is a structuring structure. It is affecting your contact with your neighbor. It's affecting your, as it was with your connection to the climate. If it's cold, if it's wet, if you have water and whatever. So this is something that is shaping your personality. It is, as a philosopher has said, memories are not something we have, that is something that we are. And it is connecting an effective continuity between then and now. Since it's not told, not made into narration, it is something that is your secret, your privacy, and that is making you never to forget it and never being able to elaborate these memories. And it is basically also synesthetic. It means that the bread that you chew is remembering you of Ravensbrück or every situation that you're exposed to. For these women that have some connection to your previous experience are haunting you. Okay. Now back to why this Chige was. So how long time do I have to talk still?
Half an hour.
Half an hour. Very good. The surrounding that makes Chige interesting is precisely these monuments. These are partisan monuments. And they often stay at road crossings. This is from a graveyard, and you can see that they have the usual ornament. It's commemorating the state of Yugoslavia, and it's commemorating the fallen soldiers. And they are practically everywhere. I mean, I came here as a foreigner, and I was struck by the prevalence of them. It's not, I mean, Yugoslavia was using an enormous amount of concrete to commemorate the past. Extremely amounts. I mean, this started, of course, with Jasenovac, and for those of you who are not familiar with it, it was the Dachau of Yugoslavia. It was, there was a fight in Bosnia on Mount Kozara, battleground 1942. I mean, just imagine the amount of concrete that is used. But this is how the state wanted to stabilize itself. You can say that it was trying to transform the ground into a lieu de mémoire. The same with the Partisan Monument. A lieu de mémoire by Pierre Nora to say that this is ours. This is the state that is manifesting itself. I have in other circumstances used the metaphor of acupuncture. You know, acupuncture goes to the acupuncts, sensitive points in your body, and you can twist the needle and then you have a reaction. These marvelous, interesting, aesthetic objects are the acupoints also. And the mover of these acupoints was sitting in Belgrade. And of course they were memorials on the sensitive points. They are sensitive objects. You have one in Rovinj also. I was discovering it. This is from '56. So this the beginning of the huge memorial started in the '50s. But the tragic of them is that while other monuments in Czechia or Bulgaria or in Romania can be transformed into national monuments, these can never do it, because the nation to whom they are dedicating doesn't exist any longer. So that's why they are leading a very, very dangerous life, and also partially forgotten.
Is it possible to ask a question?
Oh, sure, sure.
It's very interesting. I have just a question. I'm just reflecting about you saying that the state wanted to stabilize itself with these monuments. And in Norway we had a catastrophe, 70 youngsters were killed, and there was a monument, and it were the people, the descendants, the parents, the friends, who were deciding which kind of monument, where the monument, and it was important for them to feel personal connection to the monument. So could you say a little bit more about the state turning the needle, and the state saying here is a sensitive point, and because for me it's something different than the state stabilizes this with the monuments, or the people need the monuments. Could you say a little bit about that?
Absolutely, and I was going to come to that also, because the monuments that are able to survive, these are risky monuments, they're able to survive are precisely raised, or I will come to that in the end, because those are the monuments that will go into cultural heritage. They will be turned into cultural heritage because they are upheld by the community of which the fallen victims once were a part. So it's absolutely right. Totally.
May I add something?
Yes.
I don't agree completely that these monuments don't represent the actual state today.
Yeah.
Because also in official terms, I'm not talking. Let's focus on Croatia. In Croatian constitution is in one of first article. Maybe in first article is said that the Croatian state is also based on anti-fascist movement and fight. So this movement also represent the state that is today, on their constitution. So
I think you're absolutely right that I must have been expressing myself too unprecise. They represent, when they represent Yugoslavia, that state doesn't exist any longer. And what happened, this is a complicated history and you know it much better than I do, but half of the monuments in Croatia were destroyed during the Domovinsko rat, the war in the 90s. And they were blown up, they were hammered down or destroyed in other ways. Apart from in Istria. Istria has extremely little of this destruction because many of the small partisan monuments were locally connected. Precisely. So I'm happy that you made this correction, so there is no doubt. Yeah. There is something strange with monuments in itself, and that we have to take into consideration, and that is that they are extremely vulnerable, not to being destroyed, but to be neglected. You don't see them. This is Robert Musil's Nachlass zu Lebzeiten. He was, as you know, a radical writer. And the central sentence is that you can walk down the same street for months and know every address, every show window, every policeman along the walk, and you won't even miss a coin that someone dropped on the sidewalk. But you don't notice the monument because it's too pompous. Now, you can from this conclude that he didn't like monuments. They die easily. And just to illustrate that perhaps they are not attracting people who stand in awe and looking at the monuments. But they do come alive, and this is what I want to illustrate by this picture. They do come alive at certain dates. This was taken in May 25th, and that is Tito's birthday. And the woman who is standing behind there, she is coming from a place here in Kvarner, Beprinac, and she says, this is for this woman who couldn't come here, and this is for that woman who couldn't come here. So they are stroking the hand of Tito, which he has heroically on the back of his. So this is how a monument happens on certain days, and same thing was the fate of many of the other monuments. The Gatki we can skip for a while. What I wanted to bring up now is the other next side of effective radiation or transmission from material culture. This I was brought to this place again with Lydia Nikocevic, Zaverce. I had a bit difficulty with that, but it was a town that was totally Italian. Piemonte, yeah, that means the same, I have been told, and was half abandoned. And the half of the abundance was due to some people living there and taking care of the soil and cattle and so on. Now, there is, sorry, I get so excited by this. There is an anthropologist called Navarro Yashin, who's been doing fieldwork in Greece, or on Cyprus rather. Are any one of you familiar with her? Yael Navarro Yashin, The Make-Believe Space, Effective Geography in a Post-War Polity. What she was doing was field working in the villages that had been swapped from belonging to Greek people to Turkish people in the 1970s when Turkey was when Cyprus was parted. And she said that there is a melancholy transmitted from the very ruins and from the very buildings. And she writes very beautifully about how this effect radiates from object to subject and creating constant disharmony, tension, and uneasiness in people. She is depicting how the once deserted buildings are emitting these messages both to her as a field worker and to the inhabitants, the Turkish inhabitants. Houses and farmsteads with their gardens, orchards, fig trees that once were tended by other hands, thresholds that were worn down by running feet and heavy boots, beds that were slept in, tables that are no longer used for the original inhabitants. They are emitting a looming melancholy, she says. And I couldn't help feeling something of the same when my first encounter with Istria and the many deserted towns that I was seeing, and especially fig trees growing through the ruins. And I had a good friend in Veprinac who was commuting between Trieste and that town that is located close to Opatia. And he said, whenever I'm driving through Istria, I get so sad on this road from Trieste to Istria, because there is something in the landscape that is producing emotions or affects rather. And the same kind of feeling you can have when you go through the cypresses into a graveyard or something. I mean, there is something happening to your mood. And the same thing if you get into an affective state through driving through the landscape, what is it to be exposed to the many Partisan monuments I must say, when I was driving through every part of Istria, I thought I should learn to know it really. These kind of small monuments. And this park in Partisan, it would be fascinating to see today how it looks, but 2015 it was looking like this. Often these monuments are arranged in something that is supposed to be a space of appearance, as Hannah Arendt is calling it. A space of appearance means that you must give tangibility to something which is intangible. You must have material proof of something that is intangible. And you are combining the monuments with the buildings, with the people around, with the celebration, and so on and so forth. But this monument park in the center of the town is about to be forgotten. It was, at that time at least. People have been writing ugly things on the back of the stone, this monument. I think it says Ante Gotovina there. And a beautiful sculpture by Dusan Dramonia saying Smert fascismo, Slobodna Narodno, free the people and death to fascism. Was left, it's grown with lichen, and it's totally unattended. An innocent guy who was standing at the same place was also being harassed. So you can say that this was part of a master narrative where, if you should use Louis Althusser's description of interpellation, trying to interpellate people into citizens of Yugoslavia. This was planned. This was planned by local authorities or whatever, but it was definitely not something that people were gathering money in order to commemorate. So again, we are met with things that are slowly disappearing. That, I must collect my memories here. That is why it was so provocative to put up a memory of these Italian 20 fallen soldiers. It was a pure provocation due to the fact that the whole place was made into a milieu de mémoire, or interpellated, of a state that was no longer interpellated by it. I'm going to sum up part of what I've been talking about by showing what can happen when something is here is another Partisan monument and the mover himself, Tito. I said half of the monuments that were in Croatia were destroyed, and you can see on both pictures, Partisani, Partisanka were disappearing from the place they were standing before. And Tito himself was blown up on the December 27th, 2004. He's later been restored. But now for what can happen if the phenomenon that we were talking about before. This is how a partisan monument can be destroyed and can be made into something that is the pride of the place. Pisak is a town in Dalmatia, close to a famous place for klapa singing called Omiš, south of Makarska, and this is commemorating 16 men that were falling during as partisans during the Second World War. And it was blown up, and this is the remains of the monument. But then it was resurrected by private collection of money, precisely like Catherine was saying before, and restored, and is now the pride of the village, and made a tourist site. A brochure in 4 languages is printed, and it is made part of the Partisanski Put, the partisan pass through Serbia, Bosnia, and Croatia. So you can go on a tourist tour and follow Tito's footsteps and end up in Pisak, one of the different places. That's all I had prepared for talking about today, but I am full of enthusiasm over the possibility of being able to discuss it with you. I think you sit with so much knowledge about this thing of bodily memories and how monuments can be made to remember historical events, but also to hide historical events, moments. And I will finish with a quote by the Spanish Minister of Foreign Affairs, who said in the aftermath of the Spanish Civil War, you know, that they are now in the process of digging up graves of the Republican in Spain that were fallen, not only the ones on the royal side. He said, "The future is constantly uncertain, and we know it. The past, however, is totally unpredictable. You never know what is turning up." Thank you. But questions, I mean, this, for some of you, it's the historical accuracy of what I've been telling about the country that I know a little bit about, that you know very much about. And some of you are dealing with difficult memories that you know more about than I do. So, please.
I would like to start to thank you for a very interesting lecture. It was especially for me, or maybe for us, and now I have identity on the line, of course, in the back of my head. It was very interesting to hear about the trauma you were referring to. And you are, as I understand you are referring to objects as transmitters for trauma. Trauma
Yes.
is going to be for a long time.
Yes.
And we see this in many of our interviews, how important objects are also to find your own identity. So I have 2 questions. First question, do you know about any studies who have looked at the meaning of objects in a generational perspective? Meaning that for one generation who have experiences which are traumatic, related to heat, to cold, to objects, as you were talking about, of course the objects get the bad or good memories there. But do you know anything about if the second and third generation of this person does the same with the same object? So that is question number 1. Question number 2, if I can take it at the same time, we have looked in some of our countries, we have worked with trauma, and we have found out that trauma can be transferred from one generation to the other, even if it's not told about, by even genetics, by marks on the genes, not genetics, but happens something physically. So trauma can be transferred from one generation up to 3 generations because of something in your body, one thing. Second thing, of course, the behavior of your mother or father who have experienced something traumatic can be transferred further on in generations. Do you know anything about objects? How does objects fit in this trauma transfer, memory transfer? So there's 2 different questions, but maybe a little bit too different. We can take it later on today. But
I mean, you're putting a very relevant question. if you're working with affect, then you know that the most important things are never said. You can read it by a lifted eyebrow or looking aside. The things that you can talk about, that can be forgotten. But what they notice immediately that when you're approaching a theme or a topic that is hurting, then you're silenced. And you don't have to be slapped or something. So we who are interested in body and culture know that the most intimate and most important things are, as a matter of fact, almost never talked about. I mean, I have been looking at the change in sexual behavior during the 20th century, and it's fascinating how people are not talking about what is most important to them. When it comes to sexuality, they don't talk about it. It's about doings, and it's about embarrassment and things like that. So if there is anything a child knows, it is to identify embarrassment. Then it was the question about objects. and can objects produce this transmitting from generation to generation? Definitely yes. There is a woman called Tess Burton, who wrote a book in 2011 that is called Painful Memories. And she is calling it chronic pain as a form of remembering. And you can find it as one of the references in Sensitive Objects, that book. She says that objects from fathers' participation in the Second World War, for instance, are having such an enormously strong impact upon the children and grandchildren. I mean, again, this is a kind of making the intangible tangible. So it's not only spaces of appearance, it's objects of appearance also. That I have a picture in this book. I don't remember if I can find it now. It doesn't have, but we made an experiment at Titus Kumrovets. We were there, a whole gang of field workers in ethnology, and we were trying to see how a place like his birthplace could come alive, and what happened to us when we're trying to impersonate that. I don't have a memory of living under Tito, but all the other students had a memory of this. They had been pioneers. And a female student found a chest of drawers at home in which the old pioneer uniform was found. And she has been describing the enormous embarrassment and laughter and sorrow that was coming over her when dressing up in the pioneer uniform again, with the characteristic cap, you know all about it, and the red scarf and the jacket and so on. So definitely objects that you can have some kind of personal relation to can function as a transmitter of affects. But I would go to this study by Maja Frykman-Poprosanovic. She is having a lot of very useful references, and her paper or contribution to this book in Sensitive Objects is is very much dealing with the continuity of affects. And if you want to have the title of it, it's open access, so it's just...
I can find it. Thank you. It was very useful. Thank you very much.
Sensitive objects of humanitarian aid, corporal memories and affective continuities. I'm sorry to not be able to project it on the screen here. There is a rich discussion there of how to, but I mean, the privilege you have as a field worker is to be able to combine the interview. I mean, some affect researchers are saying you have to be present at the moment. You must read the body language and everything. And when it comes to narrations, they are too much representational. They are going through too many of the they are worked over too much. So you must have the immediacy of the situation. But she was working with interviews that were referring to what happened in Sarajevo in '92, and she was going through this in 2015. So there still are some, you can read it from the text, but it was very good interviews. It was done by psychologists, by the way. So there are fragments of it, of course. You know very much more about it.
Any more questions? Thank you, Jonas.
I forgot to mention to you that this poem was in Czech. It's in Italian, but amateurishly translated by someone who pretended she knew Italian. But it's extremely moving.
Now half past 12 or at 1? So we have half an hour to it. Yeah. No. We need to